All right, perfect. So I think part of the conversation that I'm going to start with is just like the mental aspect of this conversation. Um, there's oftentimes a misconception within the marketplace that like people are really competing with discount brokers or discounting at a high level, when in reality it's more so them telling themselves that. And so what I did is I pulled some stuff from the National Association of Realtors. They gave a profile that I think kind of leads into the discussion around commissions and how to defend your commissions, because if you understand this at a really high level, it'll help you understand like what you have to do on the front end to defend your commission before you even get into the conversation, if that makes sense, right? So I'm going to go through some quick little insights and tidbits for you that will help you prepare for your meeting with a seller in advance, if that makes sense, right? To get you in the right sort of mindset. So if you look through this was the profile that the NAR did last year. And I'm going to just kind of frame it up like this, right? Buyers, when their expected tenure within a home, when a buyer goes into it, a buyer typically, right? A buyer typically says, let's just say 65% of the time, they think they're going to keep the home from 8 to 20 years, right? That's a long horizon. Well, the reality of it is when you look at the tenure with they were in their previous home, 38% of the inventory turns over in less than 7 years, right? So if you think about it from a mindset or frame of reference, in the sense of like 38% of people are going to buy or sell a home in the next 7 years, and give it between the next 2 to 7 years realistically. The tenure of turnover actually happens more frequently than what buyers believe it to be. So if you think about it in the framework of how do we maintain and remain in a relationship with buyers and sellers, is that process in which they go through buying and selling happens a lot faster than people realize, right? So it's why so often that we harp on the contacts and the relationship you have with your database as being so important, because that arc of horizon of when people buy and sell happens much faster than people realize. Jumping into it then, when you look at on the buyer's side of it, right? And again, I'm really framing this conversation around helping people understand the first step in the buying process. What are buyers looking and going through? When you look at this, right, 44% looked online for properties for sale, 16% contacted a real estate agent, or 12% looked online about the home buying process. What this tells us here, 72% of buyers began their process online or with a realtor, right? 72% began online or with a realtor, and just in terms of beginning their process of buying. Because what you have to frame your reference and thinking is listing, if you're going into a listing appointment that you're beginning to defend your commission, you have to have the understanding of where people are beginning to look for when they begin the process of buying, right? Where the sources of information of where the buyers use, no shock here, online is a large majority of it. But when you look at it, 87% of people still leverage and utilize the information provided by a real estate agent, mobile or tablet device, open house. So if you think about it, again, as it relates to information sources that buyers use, it all goes back to how are you framing your value proposition to a listing to help your sellers understand where you're going to help them see the largest return on their investment and source buyers for their property to get top dollar in the fastest amount of time, right? So then as it relates to where buyers found the home they purchased, 52% of the time they found it on the internet, and 29% of the time they found it through their real estate agent, right? So right here you could say, all right, 81% of the time where they found the home they purchased, the source of information came from the internet or real estate agent. Okay, again, I'm just framing up the conversation as it relates to how do you create your value proposition for the discussion with your sellers. Then here within the study, the next one was method of home purchase, right? And if you look in 2019, 89% of the time, 89% of the time, someone leveraged a real estate agent or broker to purchase their home. That was an all-time high in 2019, right? And there's a phrase within our industry that's being very, I would say, kind of popularized in the sense that these transactions are only getting more complicated, not less, right? And in matters of complication, people usually go to a source of information or a knowledge expert to help them through the complications of a transaction. And this just shows that 89% of the time, method of purchasing a home is through an agent, all-time high. So then let's just shift, right? We're just shifting our mindset around, we've began the conversation around where buyers begin. Now look at how sellers found their agent, right? Where do sellers find their agent? 66% of the time, sellers were either referred or were past clients, right? 2/3 of the listings in the United States last year came from referrals or past clients. They just used the same agent again, okay? 66% of the time. So what does that tell you? Your reputation and brand are the most important asset you have within this business, right? And then as it relates to seller interviews, when someone wants to list their home, 75% of the time, they only interviewed one agent to list their home. And if you really look at it, if you add that up, 90% of the time they interview one, maybe two people. So again, if you go to the basic statistic within Milwaukee that a real estate agent, the average person in Milwaukee knows 12 real estate agents. Unless you're number 1 or number 2, 3 through 12 don't matter because they never get there through the interview process of listing a home, right? And now there are some anomalies to that. And yes, I understand in the luxury market, I believe that more interviews do tend to happen. But when you have an understanding that the average price point in Milwaukee is $226, that majority of the time, sellers are only interviewing one agent. So again, if they're only interviewing one agent, what does that tell you about how do you have to defend or tell your value proposition in the upfront process of helping secure or find people who want to sell their home? My point being is, if you really look at this data as it relates to seller interviews, if you're getting into lots of conversations as it relates to commission negotiations, we have to think about what we're doing up front on the front end, because oftentimes, 90% of the time, they're only interviewing 1 or 2 people. And when you only interview 1 or 2 people, very, very unlikely that they're hassling or negotiating over price, right? So I'm leading this as helping you frame your mental mindset as it's very, very vital and important that A, you invest in your reputation, and B, that you invest in your brand, knowing that so many of these just happen to go to one person. And then what is it as it relates to what sellers want from their agent, right? Within this same study, you can see here, they want someone to help market their home to potential buyers, help sell the home within a specific time frame, price it competitively, things like that. Nowhere on here does it mention anything as it relates to compensation. Again, so as it relates to the compensation aspect of this conversation, what we have to help people understand is oftentimes they get in their own way and they actually don't believe in their value proposition as the agent enough, which is what leads to people giving up on the conversation of compensation too quickly. And then the most important factor for sellers when they're deciding an agent's reputation and honest and trustworthiness being the most important aspect of who they go with as it relates to when they list their home. You can see here, commission only shows up in 3% of the time as the number one determining factor as to why they chose to list the list with someone that they did, right? And then within the compensation negotiations, I found this to be very interesting. You can see here, 46% of the time, the agent initiated the discussion of compensation, right? And if you look down below, roughly 30% or 28%, the client did know of commission fees could be negotiated, but didn't bring it up, or the client did not know commission fees could be negotiated, right? So if you really look at this again, and I see this constantly, it's the agent who goes into a conversation either not believing their worth or not understanding how to communicate their value is that where it trips them up in conversations of compensation. And then if you look at method of use to sell a home, I put this in here more so if it's a solid indication of where people value our profession long-term is last year in 2019, 89% of the homes that turned over within the marketplace utilized an agent to sell their home. Again, just to say, people very much understand the value of the agent within the process. It's our job to help you understand how to communicate your value to defend your commission. Any questions there just before I kind of move on? I just wanted to kind of frame that up as a beginning kind of mindset as to, again, I find most of the time where agents begin discounting their commissions, they're doing it for really three reasons. One, they don't understand their value. Two, they don't know how to communicate their value. Or three, and I know this to be a fact in the North Shore right now, some people can afford to discount their commissions in order to take market share in the long term, but I think that's a finite game, not an infinite move as it relates to a strategy. But I'll just kind of open it up because we have a small group today. Just kind of open it up for questions for there. No, good.
I have a question.
Yeah, shoot, Sharon.
I think one of my values is that I'm a very good resource person. For example, I sold a house which will close next week, and I knew I needed a roofer and I knew I needed a chimney person before I even walked in the house. So I started calling people to give me estimates on what it would take to fix that. And when I went to actually have the signatures on the offer to purchase, I had those things handy, and they were really excited about that. I'm not sure I know how to convey that unless I have a customer or client in front of me. How would I do that? And I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and Ross, feel free to jump in too, because you're very articulate on this kind of topic. It's helping your clients understand that, yes, your fiduciary responsibility is to ensure that the transaction goes smoothly, but you want them to view them as a resource for life as it relates to all aspects of their real estate. And I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, we had heavy rains. A bunch of people ended up with water in their basement. What's a great way to reach out to your database and contacts? Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know you bought your house 6 months ago. I'm just checking in. Do you have water in your basement? No? Okay, great. I'm glad it's dry. B, yes? Great. Here are 3 resources: Paul Davis Restoration, this, that, and the other. I want to ensure that I can help you resolve the problems that you're having with your home. Most people think, let's just transition this to like a lead generation conversation. Most people think lead generation is simply the question of who do you know that wants to buy or sell a home? And I think if we shift our mindset as to, hey, I am Sharon Warsh, the expert as it relates to your real estate, how can I help be a resource for you as it relates to your home, right? Hey, you know what? I have a leaky roof. Great. Here's my recommended roofer. Hey, because I think, Sharon, in that conversation, when people view you as being essentially, I'm going to age myself here with this reference, but if they view you as the yellow pages of real estate, and that like, hey, I want to remodel a bathroom, who would you use? Would you be able to rattle 3 people off at the tip of your tongue, right? And do you have a book of people that you could refer to? And when people view you in that light, that's what allows you to build a repeat referral business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll give you another example. I saw on Facebook, one of my clients was remodeling their kitchen, and they went, oh my gosh, I forgot to put the technology wiring into the house. I need somebody tonight. I called them and I said, don't worry, I'll have somebody there by 6 o'clock tonight. Sure enough, I did. And they were like stunned that, and I guess until the actual, I like your idea of the lead gen saying that, because I didn't think to do that. But now I see why it's important to keep tabs on all the conditions, like you said, a flood or whatever.
It's a great way, because then what happens of that? Let's say you call someone who, it's a first-time home buyer, they've never really had a home before, and their basement floods, just using that same example. And let's say you come to the rescue and help them solve their problems as it relates to having water in the basement, right? Well, those people may know 5 or 6 other people that are going to be buying homes in the next 6 to 12 months. And those conversations always start with friends being like, hey, who did you use? How did you like the process? Oh my gosh, we had this major issue. Sharon helped us solve it. She's great. I wouldn't call anybody else, right? Like when your clients view you in that light and then can be a raving fan for you with their friends, your database can grow exponentially.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. What else? Good on this kind of just framework from a mental standpoint, framework up front. Then I'm going to kind of jump in because I've gotten a lot of questions about this within the marketplace, and I just need to reframe the way people view discount brokers in and around and within Milwaukee as it relates to listing homes. Because when you really look at it, who is listing homes and who's not, here's what I would tell you. Lake Country Flat Fee, Redefined, Homestead, and Excel are probably the 3 largest discount brokers within the marketplace right now, right? And I'm going to give you 3 little nuggets of comparison as it relates to, I use just KW in a general sense, is Keller Williams agents have sold 192% more listing volume than the top 4 discount brokers combined year to date in 2020, right? And why is that important? Scale is your friend. In an environment where information right now is so tight and the marketplace is very tight, scale of information will help you get your sellers the largest return on their investment. So if you look at it as to why is your relationship with Keller Williams important, the scale of KW can help broaden exposure to the listing, and also provide the opportunity for buyers to get the information in advance to help, again, drive up their price. 2, on average, KW agents sell homes 9.5% faster than the top 4 discounters. So if you look at carrying cost, right, and you look at here and within this red metric, these are just information that I pulled this morning. Sharon, I can send this to you too.
Yeah, send it to everybody.
Yeah, I will, totally. The red metric here is days on market, and you can see there's carrying costs as it relates to when you get a accepted offer to the closing table, right? There's taxes, there's water and sewage, there's mortgage, prorated mortgage, all those sorts of things. So if you're able to walk in and say, hey, listen, I can sell your home 10% faster than the average of the top 4 discounters, that's super important because people list their homes because they want to sell them, not because they want to put them on the marketplace for over, 50, 60, 90 days. And then 4, on average, KW agents sell homes that are worth 16% more than the average of the top 4 discounters. Why is that important? It just simply goes to show in higher price points, if a KW agent can sell a home faster at a higher price point where typically days on market goes up as price points go up, it says, listen, the value of working with me and in my relationship with Keller Williams will help you sell your home faster for the highest return on your investment. Versus, in the Lake Country marketplace, we see Lake Country Flat Fee a ton. But again, I go back to when you really look at, this is total listing inventory so far year to date in terms of who's taken the listings. People believe that they're competing against these discount brokers at a high level, when in reality, they're not competing with the discount brokers at a major scale. I mean, these guys have 1% of the total market share versus the 9% of the listing market share that Keller Williams agents have. It's, again, if a discount broker is getting in on the conversation ahead of you, the question is not they're getting in because of the commission-based conversation. They're getting in because what is the agent not doing to get in on those conversations in advance, knowing that 75% of the time they only interview one agent, right? So that, to me, when I look at the flat fee guys, and listen, there will always be a place for the flat fee brokers because the market will demand it. At the same token, if there was such a huge demand for that right now, you'd see major year-over-year growth rates of these brokers, and you're not seeing that this year, especially in a tight market where people say, all you got to do is throw up a sign and it'll sell. All of these guys' businesses, other than Lake Country Flat Fee, are down this year. So again, that tells me there's a place for them in the marketplace, but yet agents aren't doing a good enough job on the front end to communicate their value as to why they should be defending their 6% commission. Does that make sense? Cool. And
the
then,
other thing I didn't know, Charlie.
Yeah, go ahead, Ross.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the other thing I didn't know before really looking into a lot of these discount brokers or flat fees is that flat fee that they charge the seller is an upfront fee. So it's not a performance-based commission. And I think there's a part of that is, but for the most part, the seller is really taking on a lot more of the risk in the sense that they're getting less marketing, less exposure, and having to pay X amount of money up front without actually seeing the work of the agent and how the marketing is going to work in that specific home.
Yeah, it's a good little insight, for sure. So then I'm just going to transition over some for sale by owner insights, because again, most people, and I've even heard this from some of our friends, well, the market's so hot right now, why wouldn't I just list the home myself and you know, I can pretty much sell it myself. Well, let me think about it like this, right? For sale by owners last year in 2019 accounted for only 8% of the total transactions within the marketplace, okay? 36% of sellers last year tried to sell their home first before hiring an agent. Okay, so if you look at that and you say, okay, 8% of the transactions last year actually sold them for sale by owner, but 36% of them tried to sell their home first before hiring an agent. The delta on that is, what, 28%? Almost a third of the time, people, and they're not able to do it, right? They don't have the expertise. They don't understand how to do it. They don't know where to start. And time is the one thing that is the most beloved commodity. Most people don't have the time in order to prep their home to sell it, which is ultimately why they turn it over to an expert such as a realtor. But then here's the biggest one. And this is the one stat, if any time I was going into somebody who was thinking about selling their home for sale by owner, on average, realtors sell homes 23% more than a FSBO. Okay, so let's start that role play and dialogue. Oh, so Mr. Seller, you're considering selling it for sale by owner. Okay, well, oftentimes, even though you sell it for sale by owner, there is a buyer's agent on the other side of the transaction 90% of the time, right? Okay, so you're still paying 2.4%. So in the end of the day, you're really only saving 3.6%. Okay, you're saving that 3.6%. Let's just do some quick math on a $300,000 home. It's a $9,000 savings. Now, let's just say you go FSBO through the whole thing, right? And knowing that realtors sell homes 23% more than a FSBO, well, 23%, 300,000 times 0.23 is $69,000 difference. So you're willing to give up, let's just call it $9,000 worth of commission to sell your home short of a $69,000 return. It makes no sense. So the other way to frame it up is to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand that the 3.6, knowing that there's going to be a buyer's agent more often than not on the other side of the transaction, that 3.6% on a $300,000 home is $9,000. Okay. Now let me frame it to you like this. If I said, I'll take $9,000 from you and you could invest that and I'll hand you a check for $70,000, would you do it? Yeah. I mean, there's not a person in this world that wouldn't write a check for $9,000 to get a $70,000 return. That's the difference we're talking about here, because the national average on for sale by owners is a 23% less return than what an agent can sell the home for. Where would you like to sign? I mean, that's the one stat I would use all the way true and through as it relates to for sale by owners. Cool. I'll stop there. Questions from the group? No? Good. All right, Ross, I'm going to turn it over to you, kind of just to dig deeper. If people have questions for you as to how you, when you walk into the conversation, how you charge your admin fees on top of your commissions, as well as kind of going back into that dialogue about how you break down the seller net sheet as it relates to the, going from 6% to 5% and things like that.
Absolutely. So I apologize ahead of time if I lose signal or I cut in and out at all. But to Charlie's point, and just full disclosure as well for everybody, I am still working on my script and my dialogue around the buyer agency 295. It's something that I haven't been able to introduce well enough yet to really feel comfortable and to get that. So a lot of the times it just doesn't come up in the conversation with me. And sometimes that's just a cost that I end up eating or not getting or whatever it is. But on the listing side of things, I've gotten very, very comfortable explaining and proving my value when it comes to commission. And to Charlie's point earlier, a lot of times it doesn't even come up. It's one of those things where you address it, you talk through it. The easiest way that I've found in not having it become a point of negotiation is including it on the net seller sheet. I talked about this in our team meeting, I think 2 weeks ago. That net seller sheet, the Excel document, has really been my crutch. I've learned that sellers are more concentrated on the 6% aspect of a sales transaction rather than what 6% in dollar wise actually means. And typically they're not going to ask you to go anything lower than 5%. So you really only need to discuss what 1% looks like. And when you break it down into actual dollar amounts, to Charlie's point about a $300,000 house, you're talking about a $3,000 difference in commission. And if I really get a lot of pushback on it, the one thing I always bring up is if you hire the wrong agent or an agent who isn't as skilled in negotiation as we are, or isn't going to be marketing your home or putting in the effort that we are going to promise you that we do with every listing, the first thing they may do is call you for a price reduction. And on your $300,000 house, they're not going to ask you to drop price by $3,000. They're going to ask you for a $5,000 or a $10,000 price reduction. So by you saving 1%, which was $3,000, it's going to automatically cost you anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 because you wanted to save that 1%. And that's really what I lean on. And again, just going back to the numbers on what they're going to net at the end of the day, if those numbers are essentially what they were looking for, they're happy with those numbers, the conversation really ends there. It's fine. Like if I can net $270,000 after I pay off the remaining mortgage on my house and then pay you commission, great. Let's move on to the next step. So that's really what I've taken from the 6% plus 695. I also have the benefit of being on the Jay Schmidt group, where we have a large administrative team. We have operations people, we have a photographer, we have a marketer, we have a stager. We have a lot of overhead that we're able to kind of lean on, in the sense of, this is why the 695 is what it is. It's not just me as your agent. You're getting an entire team of people behind you. For those of you that are individual agents, we have like a little bit of a web diagram that we've created. Go ahead and create your team. So if you utilize Renee, or you utilize Focus Title, or you utilize people in our administrative office at Keller Williams, so you utilize people like Kimmy for your compliance, and you utilize Lindsay for your technology, and Mandy for all your training and keeping up to date with administrative items. So all of that, like, leverage the fact that it's not just you that they're hiring an entire team of people, an entire suite that is going to make the process of selling their home as painless as possible because of all the support that they're going to have. And then to Sharon's point earlier, lean on your contractors. Start creating those relationships with people where if you know that their furnace is old, maybe it doesn't need to be replaced, but if it comes up on inspection, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have a really good relationship with an HVAC person. They can give us a quote pretty much instantly. If you want to get one now, we can even do that before we list the house, just so that you know what it's going to cost. In my family, personally, my brother-in-law owns a roofing company. My uncle is a cabinet maker. I've got painters in the family, like all these different things that you can enable to leverage just to show that, again, you're not just the person that's going to sell their house. You're the person that they're going to be a resource to do everything else that's involved with it. And then the last thing I'll mention before, I know I've just been rambling here, but the other thing I always agree with or I bring up to sellers is that the difficult part, especially in this market, is not selling the house. It's not getting the house under contract. That's the easy part. There's so many buyers, the rates are low, the market's hot. The difficult part is not getting your house to have an offer, unless of course you think it might be, if it's an expired listing that hasn't sold or whatever it might be. But typically if you have a good product, it's not difficult in selling it. The difficult part is keeping everything together, keeping the other agent on track, making sure deadlines aren't missed, lining up contractors if needed, getting the title company involved. Those are the things that people don't necessarily take into account. So I always agree with people that in today's market, getting your house sold is not difficult. The hard part is making sure that everybody stays on the same team all the way through closing and that we have a happy seller and a happy buyer. So that's really how I defend a lot of what I do, is showing them the hard numbers and then doing what I just did now and just kind of spewing as much value as I can, given what it is that's important to them. So I'll stop there.
Questions, comments? And guys, just for your reference too, this is the seller net sheet that Ross was referencing. And this, I sent this out on 6/23, but I can send this out to this group again as a follow-up to this phone call on how to leverage this. And this is where you can see here how you play with the various different price points, property tax. I mean, there's some inputs here that then you can also play with listing commissions, or you can compare yourself versus other brokers who are saying, hey, they're going to take it at, I don't know, 4.5%, the 6%. What is the savings up front that you have to negotiate between, right? And then to Sharon's question in the very beginning of this is then, you know, okay, 6% plus, let's just say 495, right? How are you justifying the 6% plus 495? So Ross, let's just role play that. I'm the seller, you're the agent, and you're getting, what do you charge, 695? Yeah,
so in this part of the contract, we have the commission. So our commission is, we are a 6% broker plus 695. 2.4% of that goes to the cooperating broker. So whoever brings us the buyer, we pay out, part of our 6% plus 695 is that we pay out 2.4% to whoever brings us the buyer. Yeah, Ross, so that's interesting, but why? I mean, 6% is what I thought I was paying you. So what is the net? What's the additional 695 fee for? The 695 is an additional commission that covers our administrative costs. So everything that we talked about as far as having people involved in the transaction that are going to make sure dates and deadlines aren't missed, our professional photographer that goes in here, our staging, our marketing, all of that is tied into that 695 fee. And again, that 6% is the commission, and then the 695 is the additional fee for other services that we offer. Yeah. The other way to frame that up, guys, too, from an agent's perspective, is to say, you know, we're going to come in, we're going to do professional photography, we're going to do professional staging, we may do some painting, this, that, and the other, right? And based on my history or calculations or KW, or you can frame this up of however you want,
I understand that the expense of those items to service your house at the highest level is $695, right? And then if you go into where the 6% goes, well, 2.4 of it goes to the buyer's agent. Another 30% goes to Keller Williams because the broker takes a piece of it, right? There isn't a ton of profit margin associated to these transactions. And the 695 really helps me justify helping bring in the highest level of service to cover that expense, to making sure that we're getting the highest return on your investment. And boom, you move on. Oftentimes, I've heard this, I've heard Ross say it, I've heard Jay Schmidt say it, I've heard it Maureen say it, Rick Rubin say it, that when you get to the 695 equation of the conversation of the BAC, people are instinctual animals, right? And if you think about it, they will buy the confidence and the value in which you deliver that script around 6% plus 695. And if they feel a moment of hesitation or a moment of nervousness or things like that, that's when they pounce to then start asking more questions. But your big agents across Milwaukee who list homes at a high level every single day, the lion's share majority of them are now charging it broker administration fees because of the extra value and services and the expense associated to selling those homes and such little margin.
The other thing too, Charlie, that the other thing that I have in my back pocket for if it's really a contentious commission, obviously none of us are going to give up a listing or lose the potential to list a house over 0.5% or even 1%. So typically what I'll do is if they are really, really pushing against that 6% plus 695, I'll bring out the seller sheet again and I'll mention to them, okay, so if I have these 3 price points on here, and typically I try to do this is where we would list, and this is what I expect we would be able to get. The second column is the worst case scenario, so maybe it's $5,000 or $10,000 less. And then the third case is the best case scenario, and I always preface that with, obviously I can't make any promises, and we don't like to underpromise or overpromise and underdeliver. But in this market, we are seeing that homes typically go for over asking price. So if that's the case here would be the best case scenario, right? So I give them those 3 different options. And I'll let them know that, okay, obviously the commissions are important to you. I understand that. Hopefully it's the most expensive part of selling your home, unless we uncover a huge foundation issue or roof issue or whatever it is. But typically the commissions are the most expensive aspect of selling your home. If I can't get you at least this number, I agree with you that I should have to share in the pain of you didn't get the most money you wanted, so I probably shouldn't get the most money that I want. Why don't we say that if I get, let's say it's a $300,000 house, if we have to take less than $290,000 on this house, I'll drop my commission to 5.5%. And that way you and I both share in the pain of not earning, however you want to phrase that. That usually is the only time that conversation goes any further, is if I have to write that in the contract, and I'll do it. The seller, it kind of de-stresses the seller. They feel like they've won, even though they haven't won yet, I guess, if you think about it. And if you have that relationship with the seller, the other thing you kind of joke about, if that's the agreement that you come to, is, okay, so I'll also write in that if we get the higher number of 310, I'll go to 6.5%. And you can make a little bit of a joke of it, right? Because you're giving them more than they thought, right? But typically that's the only time that I've had to reduce commission, is in that scenario of, if we take less, then I'll do this. And then I do play with commission a bit when I'm helping someone buy and sell. So if you're representing both sides of it, I typically go to 5.5% on that. That's the way that I operate. Obviously, everybody's different, but knowing that you're also going to represent them on the buy side, and there's commission to be made there. Granted, it's 2 separate transactions, but in order to secure that listing and secure that buyer, giving up 0.5%, which in this case would be $1,500 on a $300,000 house, is worth it to get those 2 commissions.
So my takeaway in all of this is twofold. One, be firm in your resolve around your value that you can deliver for your clients. Knowing a few of these tips, right, or nuggets in the background of, okay, you want to go for sale by owner. Did you know you'll, on average, you get 23% less? That's a significant amount when you're really only trying to save 3.6. So that's why we always talk about practicing your scripts and dialogues as it relates to knowing and communicating your value proposition. And I think why I asked Ross to jump on, why Ross is so good at this, is Ross really understands the financials and helping clearly communicate the differences in these numbers, leveraging the seller net sheet in order to communicate or overcome any sort of objections that come in the way of commission conversation. Ellen, you've done this for a long time. I don't. Any thoughts from your end?
No, I've actually learned. I never thought about the 5.5%. I actually would go to 5% in the doing it on a double pop, you know, buy sell thing. But no, this is good, and I never did the seller estimated sheet before.
Cool.
Net sheet. It was good.
Awesome.
I have a question, Charlie.
Yeah.
Would you write into special provisions that if I sell, I will agree to 5% if it sells for less than asking. However, if it goes over asking, I will charge 6%. Would you put that, or 6.5%? Would you put that in special provisions in the offer to purchase or in the listing contract? Rather.
I think that was a joke. What?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've never gone over 6, but the point about the 5.5, or even if you have dropped to 5 or whatever that number that you come to based on this sales price, I do put that in the special provisions in that last page of the listing contract. I will put it right in there.
I'll tell you this.
But you don't tempt them with the 6.5.
Only as a joke, but no, I wouldn't actually put that into the actual contract.
Right.
But it actually would then soften the whole conversation in case, you know, the seller's still a little unsure, edgy, you know, but you throw, hey, you know, we go higher up, let's make it 6.5%. Then they're like, no, we're good. So
you can use humor to your advantage in a big way to diffuse an
thing.
objection. I've also seen this too, and I've seen this live in a listing presentation. You know, on the contracts, it says 876, right? And oftentimes they say, well, 8%, you know, if someone says like, well, why, you know, what about 8%? You said, well, you know, 8%, you kind of make this up, right? 8%, you get this, this, and this. 7%, you get this, this, and this. 6, how about this? Let's settle on 6%, and I'll throw in all the stuff you get for 8%. What do you think? And they'd be like, oh, sure, boom, 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 right? Like they feel it, the perception is they feel like they're getting a discount, when in reality, it's just 6% is kind of the standard. But I've seen that used, like you'd be shocked more often than not. People are just like, hey, you know what, 876, because most consumers, you got to remember, most consumers really don't understand that, you know, the 6% or that's like kind of industry standard. They have no idea.
Or that 2.4% of it goes to the other agent. That's
not just the other agent. I break it down beyond that. I say that there are 4 entities sharing in the 6%.
Yeah.
So it's both the brokerage houses and the agents. So even though it looks like a big number, or you feel like it's a big number, when you have all these other fingers in the pie, it really isn't.
Yeah.
You know. Because they do think, and we kind of shorthand it and say, well, you know, 2.4 goes to the other agent, and Ross, I know you know what you mean, but they, you know, sometimes people don't.
Yeah, and if you need
the other thing that doesn't help as well is like the show Millionaire Real Estate Agent on Bravo. I mean, it's a great show. I love watching the show. But they always show the potential commission for some of these, you know, multi-million-dollar properties, and they give it exactly 3%. And you're like, oh, that guy who has the nice suit and the really nice car and the fancy apartment, he gets to walk away with $274,000.
Right.
Well, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, I want 6% in that with those kinds of numbers personally, but
Huh.
anyway. No, this was
Lovely.
good. You know, it's always good to hear things, and the objections do come up from time to time. My sense was that the discount brokers were bigger players than they clearly are. So that's my good takeaway from all of this.
Yeah, and that's why I showed that up front, because a lot of people, especially agents, get real apprehensive about, oh my gosh, I'm going up against a discount broker. These guys are tiny pieces of the business, you know. And the other thing, I will leave you with one last thing, and I'm just going to share my screen on something, and I'm going to show you an email I sent to someone this morning, and I'm offering this up to anybody who would like it. So Lindsay this morning sent me a note, and well, I'm just going to make this bigger. She emailed me yesterday and said, hey, I'm going against someone from EXP for a listing at in Oak Creek at 400,000. Can you help me get some nuggets as to why they should list with me, right? And this took me all of 5 minutes. Okay, Oak Creek 400,000. Keller Williams is the highest listed sale price ratio at 101.9. KW also sells homes in Oak Creek within this price range at the fastest, with a days on market of only 7 days, while maintaining the highest average list price within Oak Creek. And this person, they knew who they were going up against. EXP had not sold a home in Oak Creek in 2020 within this price range, right? And then I gave them the chart and the background information as to where I pulled this from. So if you ever are like, hey, I just need a little bit of supporting documentation or some, 3 or 4 key points as to why they should list with me and the importance of like leveraging KW, or even like for people who are major, we'll pull this for their individual stats. It's a great way to kind of leverage our network and scale to help you tell your story to secure a listing. So I'm happy to do that anytime, you may be out of your comfort zone.
Well,
That's
thank you.
awesome. Charlie, one last thing I was thinking about too. I haven't personally done this yet, but maybe doing more focusing on my downline or the recruiting aspect of things. One of the things we might want to also consider is, typically if you're doing a deal with a discount broker, you hope that, it's not the worst deal you've ever done, right? Like there's a lot of great agents that work for some of these discount brokers. Use it as a potential recruiting technique of, if you know that they only charge, 3.99% for a listing, maybe have that conversation with them about, hey, we do a lot of listings as well, and we get 6%. 2% on every single one of your listings additional to you is huge income.
Yeah.
I'd love to sit down with you and teach you, these are our scripts, this is how we do it, this is how Keller Williams operates, and help you grow your business and become a more successful agent, rather than just settling short at 4%. You're paying yourself 1.6%. You're paying out more than you're getting in, and you're doing all the work.
Yeah. I'll leave you with this. Here's my parting take. In the absence of value, people go to price, right? So if you don't know how to communicate or showcase your value, price is the determining factor, right? Price is what you pay, value is what you receive. So cool. Awesome. Well, I got to run to a 1 o'clock, guys, but Ross, I appreciate you jumping on. Sharon, Ellen, Jessica, thanks for participating. And if there's anything we can do to support you guys, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.